This video will talk about how to paraphrase. Paraphrasing is a very important academic skill, and you will need it in many different kinds of writing, in many different classrooms, many different settings, but it's also an important part of summary writing. So I want to start with a quick reminder of what we mean when we talk about summarizing. You've seen in the past that to summarize, you'll need to read the passage, then read it again, and probably read it again and again until you feel comfortable identifying what kind of passage it is. In other words, what's the author's purpose? What are they doing? A summary identifies the main idea, and you will also need to decide what details, what pieces of information are important enough to include, and what really isn't important enough to mention in a summary. And whatever is not so important, you'll delete. But whatever you decide is important enough to keep, you will paraphrase or explain it in your own words. Of course, in a summary, you'll need to show what it is that you're summarizing. So you'll mention the title of the piece and the name of the author who wrote it. But this is just a very quick refresher on summary writing. If you'd like to see more about that, go back to Module 2 and look at the video and summary materials there. For now, I want to focus on step 6, which is paraphrasing. As I said, very, very important academic skill. So what exactly does it mean? Paraphrasing is explaining someone else's ideas in your own words. So you might be taking their original words and explaining what they mean in your own words, but without changing their original meaning. You are not repeating the original, you are explaining it. So this shows that you understand it. It helps your reader understand it too. And you should not be using quotation marks here because you're not repeating it. Now, paraphrasing can be tricky, so we really have to find that right balance between getting the meaning right. I mean, you want your explanation to be correct, but if it's too similar to the original, it's not a good paraphrase. So one tip is, first of all, when you're paraphrasing, read the original several times. Be sure that you understood what it is that the original meant so that your explanation is going to be accurate. But I suggest that then you try writing your version, try writing your paraphrase without looking at the original. I say this because it can be so tempting to use some of the same words that the author used. It's actually hard not to do that, especially if the original seems already so well said or it's difficult to think of other vocabulary. So that's a real challenge. It might help if you don't let yourself look at the original while you are paraphrasing. So you have to rely on your understanding and your memory. But then you should go back, compare your version to the original, because if it's too similar, then it might be plagiarism. If it's too different, it might be incorrect. And either way, it's not a good paraphrase. So make changes as needed. But when we talk about paraphrasing, when we say explain it in your own words, well, how exactly do we do that? I mean, it's challenging. Even for a native speaker, even in your first language, paraphrasing can be tricky. But when we talk about paraphrasing, we're talking about a couple of different things. So I'm going to mention 3 strategies to you. And the first one is something I would call generalizing. So think about an excerpt like this one. This is from your reading 3 Cheers for Cultural Appropriation. The original says, "The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered some of the most sublime speeches of the 20th century." In them, he used a mostly Latinate language to evoke the trials of the Israelites while quoting the writings of a slave-owning founding father, Irving Berlin. The songwriter who wrote White Christmas and God Bless America was a Jew born in a small Russian town. Jesse Norman, and on and on. So it's quite a detailed excerpt. I mean, lots of great details there. But if I am paraphrasing it, it is not necessary to include all those details. Instead, I want to notice what the details have in common or what it is that they are meant to show me. So, why is the author giving all of these examples? If I can understand that, if I can understand what the examples are supposed to show me, then I can condense the original and I can delete some details and some unnecessary words. So a paraphrase of this excerpt might simply be, some of the most important and admired figures in history have been inspired by different cultures. That's what the writer wants me to understand here. That's why the author gives all of these examples. So that's a good explanation of the original. Another strategy that we often use when we are paraphrasing is changing the vocabulary of the original. So use synonyms, use words or phrases that have a similar meaning. If you are not sure about a synonym, you can always check a dictionary. You can check a thesaurus too. Here's a quick example. The original passage says, "The logic of those casting stones goes something like this." Now, if I were to paraphrase it, another way to say the same thing would be, "The people who are so quick to attack or criticize others believe." So I'm describing the same people, those casting stones, but I'm using different words to describe them. They are the people who are so quick to attack and criticize others. Another strategy is changing the grammar or even the sentence structure. Now, when we talk about changing the grammar, well, that could mean almost anything. The sky is the limit. It could be very small changes, like changing a verb form or a word form. Maybe the original uses a noun, you use an adjective form of the same word. You might move around clauses, even something as small as changing a singular to a plural, change but to however, and so on. And I'll give you just a few examples of what this might look like. Let's say the original said, "Time and time again, many people confuse cultural appreciation with cultural appropriations." Well, I could say cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation are often confused. Now, really, the only difference there is in the original, the verb confuse is an active verb, and I'm changing it to a passive form of the same verb. Instead of people confuse, it says they are confused by people. Or the original says, "If this exclusionary view of culture goes the distance, it will take us back to a separate but equal reality." How about, "It will take us back to a separate but equal reality if this culture goes the distance"? Notice the only thing I've changed there is simply reversing the order. I've taken the if clause and moved it after the main clause. Very small change, right? Or how about this one? The original says, "Charges of cultural appropriation are being hurled at every corner of American life." How about, "The charge of cultural appropriation is being hurled at all corners of American life"? And all I've done here is made a plural noun singular, or I've made a singular noun plural. Very tiny changes. Now, to be clear, if this is the only change I made, this is not a good paraphrase. This is definitely still plagiarism because look, I've changed just one little thing. My vocabulary is the same and the structure is the same. It's much too similar. I'm just showing you a few isolated examples of individual changes. But to effectively paraphrase, you need to apply many of these changes. So that is so important that I'm going to say it again. You must use more than one strategy in paraphrasing because if you only generalize, or if you only change the vocabulary, or if you only change the grammar, or if you only change the grammar in one or two ways, it is too close to the original. That is plagiarism. And in many courses, not only is it ineffective and a bit unclear, it's grounds for getting a 0 on the assignment or possibly even automatically failing the course. So, this is why, one of the reasons why, paraphrasing is so important. Let's try it.